Welcome to the Databricks Skill Builder series. We're glad you're here.
Hey folks, Arthur Dooner, SSA Databricks. It's been 4 months since we met about Azure Databricks Networking Security. And in that time, a lot's evolved in the serverless space. So one of the reasons I was hesitating, another being, I'm busy, but in this session today, we are going to cover very high level everything that you need to know getting started with key serverless technologies on Databricks around three big themes. One is specifically serverless SQL, which is the most important, most common serverless technology as of today in June 2024. Then we have the second big topic, which is how do we make like model serving and things work in a serverless plane. Finally, I want to talk about some ancillary services like vector search, like serverless DLT, and some forthcoming big serverless wins that people can start to use, like job clusters and all-purpose compute. How we're going to accomplish that today is through me not doing any smoke and mirrors, not any surprises, just like the last session where we built a fully secure lockdown Azure Databricks in a VNet. We will now build an Azure Databricks workspace that connects to two different services, two different, like for example, storage accounts, right? Both from a context of a data plane and from the context of the serverless plane. So you can imagine serverless SQL talks to the same data that a data plane compute will talk to, and end of the day, we'll be able to access the same sorts of data. We are going to get started. I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to show you a quick technical diagram of how some of these technologies work, and then we will go into the Azure portal and do all of this work. And feel free, follow up in comments, that sort of stuff. We love the engagement. We're here to help you, right? So anything that we can point you to accelerate these stories and your journey to serverless on Databricks. It's the future of a lot of the Databricks platform, as Ali said at our summit in 2024. We're really leaning into serverless, and a lot of the newest technologies will be serverless centered or serverless only. So get excited for serverless tech. It's coming here to accelerate your Databricks journey and really solve some of these problems long term. So in Azure Databricks, there's three big compute planes. There's the first plane that you're most familiar with, which is the customer VNet, right? That's called the data plane. So in the data plane, that's where all of your historical clusters and SQL Pro warehouses and classic warehouses, all these different types of compute on Databricks would get spun up in this virtual network zone. Now that data zone is specifically a route for these data to be able to talk to one another, right? And at the end of the day, this allows you to talk to any resource that you might have in your network. You could imagine like, hey, I've got this Azure SQL endpoint, right? You might imagine I have a, maybe I even have like a route to on-prem from here. So we could say like, okay, let me actually pull all of these different data. We have on-prem connection, connect to express route. And that express route connection could be hosting like I gotta send this to back, send backward. Guess I gotta send it to back. Can literally send us to any on-prem resources like an Oracle database, right? So at the end of the day, if you had a network route from your VNet to a location on Databricks, you could end up breaching that from your data plane. Your clusters could talk to it and pull data from it. Okay. These data planes were extremely convenient to meeting customers where they were at for connecting to whatever data. And over time, we've seen a few evolutions of this journey. The first big evolution I want to call out is when all of the different Azure resources got private endpoints. So a lot of storage accounts, for example, got connections for private endpoints. Azure SQL got connections for private endpoints. So all these connections could not just happen in your virtual network, they could also happen over a private tunnel to that fully managed service that Microsoft maintains. A lot of other platforms and third-party vendors like Snowflake, for example, specifically got private endpoints that allow you to connect any of your Azure services to, right? In much the same way. So if you got a private endpoint to a third-party system like Snowflake, you could talk to that from Databricks with that private endpoint. So I really want to classify the technologies in three big buckets. The reason why everyone said the cloud was easy was that it was easy if you only ran on identity only. Those identity only permissions were specifically, hey, deploy this out to the Azure network, the Azure backbone, they would call it, and only govern your technologies over an identity plane. The identity plane permissions here are helpful, valuable, useful, and great for a lot of customers who do not have advanced network security requirements. Okay? That was the first way most PaaS, you could imagine platform as a service, PaaS technologies ended up getting spun up on cloud. That's how a lot of folks laid their stand in cloud. Then we could say what was next is we call VNet injected. And VNet injected, as Databricks is a pretty historically old service on Azure Databricks, it was one of the first Azure services that were like first party managed, right? As a VNet injected service, what Databricks did is specifically have those VMs that you work with, right? So those virtual machines that run clusters are spun up in your virtual network such that it can make all those connections that I was talking about. But historically, like all these other services had to be deployed in like an IaaS infrastructure, just a bunch of VMs with a service running over, a lot of maintenance over this, right? There's actually a really good diagram. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Microsoft shared responsibility model. Yeah. This one, this is like it must be a 5 or 6 year old diagram now. The difference between what you have to worry about from on-prem to IaaS to PaaS to SaaS. And that IaaS world, we could end up connecting to all those IaaS services with VNet injected resources because it blended the like IaaS deployment model of putting VMs in your network with a more managed entity like Databricks, where it could just say, okay, only spin this up when I need it to, and fully manage the scaling, I should go back to the diagram, the network controls, a lot of the application controls. You don't have to worry about the OS and patches anymore. Really simplified that journey. What Databricks reaches out to do with all these other services is they are now very software as a service, right? So fully managed. Things like Snowflake, things like storage accounts, right? They aren't literally SaaS, but you can think of them as fully managed endpoints that you are just reaching out to securely and do a very specific set of things. Now, Databricks is on a journey towards being more SaaS-like. What does that mean? We want to support all of those SaaS technologies and interface with them as if we were a SaaS offering, which in many cases we are. So how does this work? We use what's called a serverless plane. That is where any Azure Databricks deployment has compute spun up in a fully managed zone for you, right? Specifically isolated from a networking perspective, right? Serverless compute that in a big, you can imagine this huge pool, right? And it's a region-wide pool. East US, just making up a region. You have East US, and in this pool, there is a mega like unallocated VM. Unallocated VM. This unallocated VM pool is then instantaneously, in the span of like a few seconds, joined to all of our customers' private networks as they need them. So they basically take a VM, and we can take this little VM object and abstract it, right? So imagine your customer one versus customer two. I should probably have better names for my customers, but Tel Aviv, customer one. I'm going to call this one customer one. And this VM will inherit all of the permissions, the security posture of this customer when it joins against their serverless plane. And it will run whatever compute against whatever data they may have. And then it will deallocate. And obviously all the drives associated with those will be wiped. So in a serverless lifecycle, you might wonder, like, how does a Lambda work? How do all these different technologies that are serverless work? We have these ephemeral compute that live in this unallocated pool that we keep warm. There are hard constraints in your VNet in how quickly we can ask a cloud provider for a VM. In AWS, that's like a couple minutes. In Azure, it's a couple more. GCP, I have no idea, but it is a overhead to how quickly you can get a responsive experience inside of Databricks. So what do? We spin up these huge compute pools in East US and all the big serverless regions, right? And then they specifically peer VMs to your serverless plane, inherit your security controls, and then act and run compute for you in instantaneous sort of time and have effortless and relatively limitless scale. Where all this is going is I really want to emphasize that this technology levels up to a layer of, wow, we actually have to think about, how do I make these other services like storage accounts connect privately to my serverless SQL? Because they can't just talk over the public internet. We don't want to allow that. We have to make sure that the connections that serverless has also connect over private networks to these additional resources. So this is where we get back to the world of NCC objects. So when you're talking about serverless compute, we have to think about, let's make a managed virtual network. What does that look like? It means that we have some boundaries around, I should probably do like a dotted line to make it look all fancy, right? A security policy of where these serverless connections can happen for different workspaces. Okay, so this is a customer NCC. So this NCC object is isolated for you, and it has connections to your different data assets that you need access to. So you could see the private connectivity for serverless compute works by attaching an NCC to a workspace. So you have like a logical mapping of the NCC object to every workspace that you might have. Maybe I can just label this workspace one. Actually, I like the dotted lines for this. That makes sense. Workspace one is now associated from a serverless plane to this NCC, right? You can attach multiple workspaces to the same NCC. And then there are networking policies, both subnet-based and private endpoint-based, to allow different services to talk to Databricks. How does this work? You'll see in these later steps, we set up private endpoint rules, where we say, hey, from Databricks' tenant, so where we go and deploy all these different resources in your region, we need a connection to your storage account that is just utilized by this NCC. And you'll actually see a request where we'll see this in a few minutes. You'll see a request reach into this endpoint and say like, hey, can I make a private endpoint here? And then you will approve like, yes, you're allowed to make a private endpoint. And that's this tunnel here from the storage account to that control plane. That's a private endpoint connection that's fully managed inside of the Databricks tenant to your data. And it's only accessible by this NCC. What makes this so interesting is that this technology can be extended to imagine connections to other resources. These connections to other resources traverse everything from model serving, vector search, Delta Live tables, serverless, right? These technologies end up allowing connections to these data in a way that is further scalable for other systems and use cases. And you'll see how this looks. Let me see if I can pull up the doc. I've got it right here. Almost. Show more. More. This doc. Yeah, here it is. When you are talking to your storage account from all these other different resources, right? You can see a serverless compute. This works for all of the different types of connections. So NCC firewall enables supported for serverless SQL warehouses, workflows, notebooks, DLT, and model serving. So a big gamut of all these different connections that will happen in a serverless context will happen in this NCC firewall setup. The private endpoint connections, as of today, June 2024, that only work with serverless SQL only. So we're going to show both of these. We're going to try to test both of these in the context of this session. I don't know if we'll have a chance to fully evaluate it, but I want to show you what each of those look like. Okay. Where we are going with this is trying to show you this is what it takes to make serverless work in your Azure Databricks environments and use everything from SQL first, that's where we're going to spend the most time at the beginning setting up, to using any of these serverless technologies in a fundamentally more secure context than just like reaching out to them over the public internet. Now, this concludes most of the architecture overview at this stage. I think they had a little bit more. Yeah, just like a lot of like advanced ML sort of engagements. What we're going to do is we're going to dive right into building a net new Databricks workspace and take that net new Databricks workspace, spin up some serverless compute there, and then specifically take connections to a private endpoint, build an NCC object, and attach the storage account to that NCC object, and then scale out this solution. First, let's check out all of the available serverless regions, which I think are most now. But I don't want to use the most busy workspaces like EastUS, because in Databricks we have a lot of resources there already, which is kind of funny. So we could hit some like weird quota limits because our Databricks tenant is so full internally for us testing. But if I just quickly hop on over and look up serverless regions, Databricks, we can find a nice, quieter region to go hang out in and make sure that we do not get in the way of anything that's already quite utilized. So you can see EastUS and EastUS2 pretty utilized. I'd like to go to a different. WestUS2 is generally quieter at Databricks. I'll take a look at WestUS2, and it's got basically all the capabilities. So that's going to be awesome for us. All right, let's get started. We can now say, let's go to create a resource. And we say, let's make a Databricks, or Azure Databricks. I always hated how, oh wow, does it still not work like that? Okay, I'm always backwards. I will just click on the Azure Databricks resources and create a new one. A lot of different ways to solve these problems. We're going to say serverless test environment. I'm going to call the workspace serverless testing. I don't know if it was listening to me, but it knows that I wanted WestUS2, so I guess that's good. Databricks has a managed resource group, so where all the VMs are like logically spun up under. We're going to call this Arthur Serverless Testing Managed RG. Yep. Then we say we're not going to worry about any of the additional networking controls that we went into in the previous configuration, because we can simulate all of the serverless security contexts without changing these toggles, which is convenient for our testing. So if you want to overlay those controls, you're in a VNet deployment with serverless, just watch that first video, deploy your environment, and then go to use that environment for the next steps that follow this initial deployment. Okay, and we've got data encryption, don't need to worry about this right now. Security, don't need to worry about right now. I do want to check, I know that we have a tagging policy at Databricks. I want to make sure I am compliant with tags, and this is my prompt to you to make sure that you're compliant with your tagging strategies. 1 second. FE public cloud infra policy. I'm just looking this up on the back end. Yep, at owner and remove after. That makes sense. Owner, that's me. Send me an email if you're having difficulty running your Databricks resources. I'm definitely happy to help you out or get you aligned to the teams that can. Then we've got remove after. So let's keep this for a couple weeks. You can see a lot of people misspelled it. I'm gonna say 2024 707. About there. It's about 2.5 weeks away. And we can review. Why did the validation fail? Oh, basics. Oh, how did I lose that? Serverless testing RG. Oh, I forgot a resource group. Tags look good. View and create. Again, I'm not the best at naming different resources, so apologies for the messiness there. So this is going to deploy. Then we'll have a resource that we want to test against. What I do want to do is I quickly want to associate with a, at the same time, I'm just going to open up a new tab, and we can deploy a storage account in WestUS2 as well. Storage account to simulate some of these connections, right? The storage account, we're just going to say close this storage account. Yeah, create. Love how there's ratings for storage accounts. It's a little silly. Serverless Arthur testing. Testing RG Arthur. Nice. Storage account name is Arthur Serverless Testing. Too long? Not too long. WestUS2 standard. We don't really need geo redundant. For this, your DR rules might warrant this. We want hierarchical namespace. A lot of folks forget to check this box when you're doing a data lake, but this basically tells you whether or not you're in a data lake or not, or just a regular blob. You want to check this box. All my friends check this box. Then networking, we're not going to worry about any of the connections that we're making to the actual compute that would get deployed for, how do I say, Databricks, not in the VNet, Databricks in our deployment right now. We're going to just say disable everything, because we're going to let certain private endpoints in for now. We'll connect to private endpoints later. We just need to create this the first time. Next, encryption, not worried about any of this right now. Obviously, be compliant with your company's policies. Owner is me. And leave after, again, 707. Awesome. Then we can go to review and create. Is our workspace up? Not yet. See, this is why we do things in parallel. Awesome. Now we have 2 workspaces up. All right, I should say workspace and a storage account. Let me see if I can get into OneEnv. That's our just fancy name for like how we manage serverless connections, and like all of the admin portal. So the hardest part of this whole process that you, from a logistics perspective, working with your colleagues and maybe ops teams and potentially even the AD account or the Azure Active Directory admin, include, where are we? I wanted to show you all. Basically getting access to define NCC objects, okay? So these NCC objects are defined at the account level, okay? I'm saying okay a lot today. These NCC objects, we're just going to duplicate this tab. We go to accounts.azuredatabricks.net. I'm going to log in. Oh, I might not have access to the thing that I had access the other day. That might be a problem. No. Hey, folks. I know that we picked things back up a couple days later. We had some internal config on the Databricks side that I didn't have the permissions to do some of the actions that we wanted to do. Anyone who this actually prompts a really good conversation. When you are setting up a NCC object, this network connectivity, I always get it wrong. The network and connectivity config, whenever you take all of those systems, you need to be an admin of the Azure Databricks account. And the admin of that Azure Databricks account configuration is always a little bit of a challenge to get right at the first time. By default, they're the global Active Directory admin to your entire Azure tenant, which is a not insignificant role. And then that permission is delegated to you as like an account admin. By default, you will see, if you say accounts.azuredatabricks.net, you won't see this like account console page with all these different configs and settings. You're going to instead see a different account, right, where we are configuring just like a list of all the different workspaces that you have there. So end of the day, that is a little bit more specific and private by default, obviously for a multitude of security reasons. So we just had to fix that on the Databricks environment. We now have this testing space called OneEnv Azure that helps us, enable these testing scenarios for other people to play around with. So you're going to see this environment as what we're going to move forward with. In this vein, I changed the machine, the actual like Databricks service, to be on a new subscription. So that's all that changed. It's the same core Databricks deployment. Nothing new there. It's just we have now deployed it here in this other subscription rather than in that original subscription we were starting with. Everything else is the same. So we launched this workspace. You'll see this workspace turn on. We'll hang out with it. We have one more thing to do on this environment. We have to make a storage account. And this is like a fundamental component that I'll show you that we then maybe delegate some permissions to and set up external locations, right? So if I go to storage accounts and I create one, I'm going to make one in East US, I believe we have. Yep. This is where I made. I'm just going to duplicate this. We have a storage account that we're going to make. I think I called it serverless testing. Yep, serverless testing. We're going to call this storage account Arthur Serverless Testing. That might be not globally unique because I did this earlier. So Arthur Serverless Test we'll have to do. We're going to deploy it to East US like the other, like where the Databricks workspace is itself. Because I'm just testing, I'm setting it to locally redundant storage. Your organization might have a different policy here, so don't worry too much about these configs. What we are simulating in this example is your Databricks could be in a VNet and not have access to the storage account by default, or alternatively, the storage account might be behind a VNet and might have like a networking zone that we're setting up. So we are specifically going to disable public access and only allow private access to the storage account. Okay? This makes it effectively inaccessible from anywhere. I'm going to probably throw some sample data on this and change the settings super quick. But for all intents and purposes, you were simulating like the storage account is inaccessible to that Databricks workspace. Okay. So we're going to review and create, or going to say next, we're going to encrypt, we're going to tag, review and create all these different things, right? And we're going to create the storage account. Now, I know I said one more thing. I actually want to show you the permission delegation. You're going to get a demo for free here because we have additional permissions. We're going to go to the Azure Databricks uh, access connector. It's right there. Access connector for Azure Databricks, backwards in my head. We say create. We put that in that same serverless testing workspace, right? We say Arthur we're just going to call this Arthur serverless testing access connector. And this is a set of permissions that Databricks uses based on the permissions that you delegate this entity to be able to act on Databricks' behalf to make changes on storage accounts. Okay, so write to storage accounts, read from storage accounts. Access connector is the identity permission layer. So to back up a little bit, right? All of this that I'm showing you here is networking. Okay, like how these networking objects work with one or another. What I really want to show you is that there are a couple different layers of security, right? So there's first that, obviously more than a couple, but I'm highlighting these two. First, there's like the Databricks workspace that interacts with data, right? And that Databricks workspace interacts with data in two ways, right? Both from the data plane, right? And the Databricks workspace networking from the serverless plane. And the identity permissions are the exact same. The identity layer that if I, as a user, right, imagine I'm this user in my user journey. So we've got Arthur here. Arthur, user, accessing data, right? The user journey here is in a workspace. There is an identity permission, right? That identity permission is calling against a, delegated by Unity catalog, right? Unity catalog is saying Arthur does or does not have access to those data. What Unity catalog does under the hood is it calls out to the storage account with the what's it called? The access connector for Azure Databricks. And that access connector actually is what makes like a short-lived token under the hood. I don't believe it's exactly a SaaS token, but you could kind of think of it like it's a SaaS token scoped for specific context for specific cluster life cycles. And that token is, generating that token for Arthur at that time on this cluster in a very specific and elegant way. And the Unity catalog layers in the additional column or row level permissions as well. For hey, the cluster can show this, the cluster can't show this, doesn't have access to do these things. So it's a super abridged, way oversimplified view of the identity stack. The identity stack is the same data plane to serverless plane, okay? Effectively. What isn't the same is the networking stack, right? So to actually get, this is the get the token journey, all right? So I can wrap all of this in kind of get token plus auth, right? As part of that step one in a user journey, we're going to draw step one as orange, right? And in the data plane, what it does is the compute clusters, compute actually run and request against the networking apparatus that exists in your network. So you have it deployed in a VNet or fully or Databricks managed it takes the networking profile of that workspace, right? Be it deployed in your network or deployed in like the public internet ether sort of Azure. Those connections actually happen through, say you've got a private endpoint, it's happening through that like cluster that is deployed. So that is how you access the storage account. The actual route to the storage account is granted after that specific token that is set up, and the route is fully managed by whatever networking stack that you have networking in between. So that could be like, there's a firewall in between this, there's a private endpoint between this, right? There's a lot of ambiguity into how this might be configured and why it would work or why it wouldn't. In the way that I've built this example so far, there is absolutely no way to access this data, and I'll show you what I mean, from a regular compute instance. So we're going to go to a compute, and I'm just going to spin this up in the background just to validate, like, hey, this is how I would like demo this to you. As I don't want it to be 20 minutes. I want it to be like 10 or maybe 30. We're going to create this compute cluster. That will spin up as we're talking, and we'll come back to it, and we're going to try to access these same data. With the serverless config, I am intentionally showing you a different route. And this is where, if you have like private network connections, a network connectivity config, say it with me, right, has a direct connection over, let's say, a private endpoint to a storage account. So this NCC object in the serverless plane is going to route through that network connectivity config. Oh, I lost it. Route through that network connectivity config to solve this problem and allow you to actually network to this data. And maybe because it's not clear on this diagram, it is getting that identity token first, just like this one is. Okay? So what we're doing, we have all of these different access strategies and that serverless will peer to, like serverless instances will like effectively join to like the networking profile of that NCC config. If I'm drawing it a little bit more accurately, it's more like this, right? But just for simplicity and logic viewing, it's kind of like this. So we'll spin up that compute. In the serverless plane, that network path is created. We have that storage account routed to it. That's what we're going to be doing for the rest of this session. Okay, so we've got a few prerequisites to get there. First, I have to delegate the access connector to have permissions to the data lake in the first place. Oh, I might not have enabled. Oh, I haven't created it yet. Amazing. Could have sworn I did. I'll check. Storage accounts. Serverless. Serverless testing. Oh, wow, I didn't enable hierarchical namespace. That's a rookie mistake. What we're going to do is we're going to quickly make another one that does that. We're going to storage account, create Arthur serverless. I can spell my name, serverless S2. We're going to, and that's another like call out, kind of on autopilot. You might not think about that. I'm going to put this in serverless testing. And again, locally redundant, no reason to cost Databricks more. Hierarchical namespace, that's what we missed. And we're going to disable public access. Review and create. And we're going to create that. So that's going to run. As that storage account is running, we can configure some of the network connectivity configs for this workspace. So what we're going to do is we're going to first set up a Unity catalog metastore for my new workspace being called Arthur Serverless Testing. Arthur Serverless, which will be right here. As you can see, it's got the Azure East US metastore already associated with it, which is convenient and helpful. Now what we're going to do is we're going to associate it with a new network connectivity config. So we're going to go to cloud resources. You're going to go to network connectivity configurations. We're going to add one, and we're going to say the Arthur NCC, and we're going to put it in East US, which is where all of our resources are deployed. So we now have Arthur NCC. Obviously, you're going to name this something a lot more meaningful and helpful. This is for like connecting to Azure Blob and other resources, right? And we say, let's go to make a private endpoint, and those private endpoints will talk to the storage accounts themselves. The workspaces will talk to, will route that NCC object to connect to that specific workspace. So if we think back to our diagram, it's basically drawing an association that the compute in this workspace, right? This compute, maybe just to make it clearer, in workspace is logically tethered to be able to use that NCC. Okay. So what we do, we're spinning up that cluster back to the account console. We're going to associate that workspace. So we're going to say Arthur, step to search Arthur, and we can security and compliant permissions. No, I always do this wrong. Configure update workspace. That's what it is. Arthur NCC update. So that's going to update the network connectivity configuration. So that will take a minute. And this is the serverless test. Okay, so it looks like our storage account is complete and the hierarchical namespace is enabled. Okay, so I am going to grant permissions from that access connector that I make to this environment. I'm going to say I'm going to add role assignment. The role assignment is going to be Azure Storage Blob Data Contributor, which is all permissions on this storage account that would read or write data or delete. We're going to assign it to a managed identity. We're going to say access connector for Azure Databricks, and I think Arthur Serverless Testing Access Connector is the one. Okay, now we're going to review and assign, and we're going to review and assign. Now there is a logical identity permission that's been granted this serverless environment. Okay, I'm going to skip around and subvert this serverless data route real quick, and I'm going to make a new container. I'm going to call it Arthur Data. Okay. And it's going to say, I can't do this, right? You see, there's a network boundary, there's a network block here. So this network block is happening because I intentionally disabled that permission. If I go, I'm just going to be uploading some, maybe I'll throw some 538 data, 538 data, just as like simple examples, right? Yeah, latest polls, sure. Can pull some of those data, right? And those simple data we can now go to put in the storage account, and too many tabs already. And I can go to, where was I? Yeah, Arthur Serverless Test 2. We're going to go to the, what's it called? The networking tab. We're going to temporarily enable access so I can go upload some of those data. We've got Arthur data. I'm going to extract that zip that 538 just gave me. Downloads polls. All right, cool. And we're just going to upload some data, some CSVs to kind of test that we have access to different things. Forbidden. Am I not? Am I not allowed to do these? Well, some of them got up there. I bet it's still propagating that permission on the storage account side. Yeah, it seems like that's weird. Never seen that on Azure before. I bet it's taking like half a second for the networking configuration to apply. Yep, enabled from all networks, containers, Arthur data. Yep, okay, so we got some data up there. Again, shows you how sometimes doing something in super real time in the cloud, it doesn't love it. We have a cluster up. That's great. That's part of what I wanted to show you. So now we actually still have enabled from all networks on. So I actually might show you it like with the network turned on and the network turned off and segmented. That would be fun. Um, let's take this and let's go and associate a catalog with or the a workspace environments. We're going to go to the catalogs. We're going to go to all of my external data. We're going to make we have this external location. I see Arthur Serverless Testing. That's an entity. So that's the fully managed Unity catalog storage. That's pointing to somewhere else, as you can see, DB storage, whatever. We're going to use, we're not going to copy from a mount point. We're going to call it, what are we going to call it? Arthur Testing Data Storage. We're going to call it storage credential is, I believe, Arthur Serverless Testing. Yes. Yes, that's it. And then the URL to get to that data path is right here in a storage account. I think I can just pull the properties, I think. Yeah, that's pretty close. So see, it's got like a URL. It's going to link to the specific file. We're going to be a little bit more generic than that. We're just going to say Arthur Data, right? This is good. This is the permission. Oh, yes. Okay, so it's not it's ABFSS / Arthur Data. This is actually, again, a Arthur doing something really quick and it being confusing problem. Arthur Data at Arthur Serverless Test 2 blah, or I think it would be DFS. Yep, create. All right, why is it grumpy? Okay, ABFSS / I think I called it Arthur Data, Arthur dash data at, and it's the name of the storage account, which is Arthur Serverless Test 2 blob storage. Maybe they renamed it all. Did I put this in the wrong blob? Hierarchical namespace is enabled. I bet it's a permission on the I'm gonna force create it as like an endpoint. Yeah, so it says this was an invalid endpoint. I don't like that. I'm gonna change edit dfs.core.windows.net. Okay, there it is. That's better. I don't know why I didn't like it the first time. Maybe I just had a typo. Okay, so now we have this permission. I'm going to grant myself it just to make sure I have the permission no matter what, right? All privileges, grant. Okay, so now I have this external location ready to go. That's great. I can browse it probably. Nope. Interesting. Arthur testing storage. And we go, sometimes these things take a little bit to settle. What we're going to do is we now have a new external location. Yep, Arthur testing storage, Arthur data, Arthur serverless test 2, dfs.core.windows.net. Yep, gonna browse. I don't know why it doesn't like that, but we're gonna try. We have a cluster online, so let's go to a workspace. Let's just make a quick notebook. Spark. We could register it as a volume. That could be nice. CSV, right? Dot load, and we're going to say this should implicitly work. We might have to detach and reattach it. We might have to restart the cluster, but that should take less long than the alternative. It's going to be like, this is a folder full of CSVs. I probably should actually give it a specific path. And we go to the containers, Arthur data. We go to, how about pres polls averages? Yeah, this is what we're going to use. Pres polls averages. Am I not allowed to use the storage permission? Okay, I'm getting deny errors on this, which is bizarre. Give it 1 second. Man. If we go to manage you know what? Sometimes this is actually another helpful insight. Sometimes when I make role assignments, I have to make it not just at the entire workspace or the entire storage account level, but the storage blob data contributor on the actual container itself. I've had to do that before, and it's always very misleading. I think this might be what we're experiencing here. Arthur serverless select. Next. Cool. Review. Okay. I have now granted that specific permissions. I wonder if that works. It might take a second. Let's try to make a volume because volume isn't directly mapped to those like same compute permissions and such. And I bet there's a timeout thing happening here. So if we go to external data, Arthur serverless testing, browse. Oh, that's the wrong one. Arthur testing data storage. All right. So I'm going to, this credential's really grumpy. This is the one that I made. Resource groups, Arthur serverless testing. Maybe I'm using the wrong access connection. I think I am. I think that's what's happening. I think I need to create the credential. That's what it is. I was like, I knew I'm missing a step. Storage credential name is, folks, you just learned a lot of UC debugging, Arthur serverless testing access connector. Yep. This resource ID is what we want. We want to call it Arthur testing for access connector. We're going to do this, right? That's the name of it. Okay, now that's the permission. The reason why the credential, I bet, wasn't working is because we're just using the wrong one. Arthur serverless testing. We're going to edit it. I'm going to use a different credential. Arthur testing access connector update. Oh, cancel. Oh, I see. I've named too many things very close to one another. Arthur testing access connector. Yep. Awesome. Now we can browse. All right, I had the wrong access connector. Now this is all going to work. We might have to refresh the actual storage account if we go to, or the compute cluster. It should inherit that, but it might take half a second. The seamlessness here, if it doesn't require that reload, that's pretty incredible. I make a change in a few seconds and it just works fine. Yep, so it's just telling me that the data is there and it's working. So I could say like dot header true dot option header comment here. Yep, and we're going to save that. So you've seen me set up the credentials. The identity stack is going to be the same regardless of um, the actual the identity stack's going to be the same regardless of how we're going to be accessing the data. And you're like, Arthur, you're not using a serverless compute yet. This is not serverless networking. So what I want you to understand is we needed to get the identity stack working. So now I can say, assistant, help me out here. Write in SQL reading from a CSV file while inferring header because we're going to use serverless SQL. Actually, can this instance use serverless? Yes, it can. Nice. So you can see serverless is going to read this in the same way. Yep. I do want this to work in SQL only because I want to show it to you like loading these data in SQL. So I'm going to copy this assistant comment. We're going to go to SQL editor. We're going to navigate to that storage route, right? We're going to say ABFSS. I just want that path that we just had. Path. There we go. Let's make sure that all works. Run all. What did I do wrong? Oh, it's making it like it's that's funny. I knew that was wrong, but I trusted it. Okay, so now you're seeing serverless SQL execute the data, execute queries on the data in short order, right? And now, as you can see, the data's there. So what we can do is we can say, if we go to the account console now, and we go to workspaces, and we say the workspace that I have, we'll go to Cloud Resources, Arthur NCC. We make a private endpoint. So we're going to route it to a specific resource, which is that Arthur Serverless Test 2. We're going to find the security and networking. We're going to go to networking, and we say private endpoint connection. So this is going to be the route. It's like, hey, I want to talk to what Azure resource? The Azure resource is going to be, I think it's on, I always get this wrong. It's on endpoints, storage account resource ID. Yep. Didn't get it wrong that time. And we're going to target DFS, which is the data lake file system. Okay. So this doesn't mean it works yet. This means that Databricks has requested on the serverless plane's behalf a permission to get to your data, right, from a networking perspective. So that is going to hang there, and you're going to look and you're going to see magically under networking, there is a request in a short moment for the actual private endpoint. So that will just show up there, and then we will need to improve it from the Azure side. And that's how the permission is safe, right? We're delegating these permissions, but the owner of the Azure resource has to say, yes, this is allowed. I allow this network connection, right? So it's private networking. It's all in these private network routes, but it is, how do I best say? Saying taking too long. Maybe we can turn off connections. Yep. Can save that. And now we just say Arthur Serverless Test 2. We say add again. Sometimes these are a little grumpy. So where we left off, we were just like getting this connection working with the add private endpoint rule. as you can see, it was maybe taking a little bit longer than usual, but it did make a couple private endpoints, a request for private endpoints. We're just going to prove one of them. I'm going to say for Azure Databricks, right? So you can see it's coming from a Databricks resource, and where it's making that private endpoint. So it's going to approve that. And then we're going to, once it approves, we're going to refresh the page. Maybe the private endpoint service is just slow today. And I'm just going to refresh this. See if we have new private endpoint rules. Okay, so it is approved. That is coming up. So the Databricks service requested the endpoint. They don't get the network access until we go in and approve it. So we approved those two, or that one, and we're just going to reject these others, like not necessary, because we already have one. So we made one. I don't know if it's showing up in the NCC yet. That's my only anxiety here. And you will see it show up here if the UI is not being slow. I'm going to assume that it is working okay. So as we would see in, yes, there's more coming through. As you can see, we now have disabled network access from this for this workspace. So when I try to run this again on my personal compute cluster, it's going to be like, I don't know what this is. And I believe it's going to time out. It might just hang forever. 403. So you're going to see this failure because this, if we look at my diagram, this route has been, there is a whole networking barrier preventing us to actually get to that storage account. Might have the identity permission, it doesn't have an actual route to get there. Now, moment of truth, assuming that the account console is working under the hood, we might not be seeing it refresh, would be to see it in the SQL editor with this query on serverless. We run 1,000. Now it might error out if it still hasn't refreshed on the serverless plane yet, but it is working under the hood, I think. As much as the UI might have failed us in this demo, and in your experience, like I spun up all these resources in the span of like the past 5-10 minutes. So that always introduces a little bit of weirdness with Azure Databricks and Azure resources. So there's a lot that's probably settling, and backend databases on both Azure and Databricks were updating, but it all actually worked, right? Maybe the UI was a little bit buggy on this view here in the NCC, but at the end of the day, it did establish that network connection because that data would have never successfully pulled as it failed on a regular compute. When we try accessing it in serverless, it works just fine. So that's the big lesson from today. How do you set up secure networking for your serverless stuff? And you could imagine a world where you have serverless, you already have established all of this VNet here, right? All of this works. And you need to just augment it with the serverless connections in much the same way you'd follow exactly the steps that we laid out here. So you might have this environment already set up. What this lesson today taught you is how to get this route working. I hope this was helpful. Stay tuned for part 3. Part 3 is going to cover an additional lens onto all the corollary serverless services and how you get networking to work on each of them. This is just an example of how to get serverless SQL working. And I hope this was helpful. Excited to help you out on the next one, and looking forward to continuing the series. Thank you all so much.